3, 2, 1. Wah! Hi everybody and welcome to another exciting edition of Boring JavaScript. I'm your host, the Virtuoid, aka Mike Smith, and today we're going to be looking at the input statement. Now, input allows you to be able to read JavaScript variables from any other JavaScript file that is different from the one you're currently working on. And this allows us to modularize everything within our application. Want to see how it works? Well, let's get started. So why do we even need an import statement? Well, let me show you an example that will show you exactly why we need something like an import. Here I have in my JavaScript file a class definition called animal. It's no big deal here. I got 3 properties. I initialized these 3 properties. Name and type from the arguments passed by the constructor, and age just given it a random number. And then I have a method here called toSuperstring, which prints out this pretty little message right here. I initiate the new animal down here with a type of cat and a name of Fluffy, and then I console log the toSuperstring. So let's show you how that works inside Node. Let's go to Node. Let's type in Node import. And the animal's name is Fluffy, and the type is cat, and age is 7 years old. Okay, no biggie. Of course, that's how it works. So what's the problem with this? Well, it doesn't scale very well. I've got an import here that creates a cat or an animal called cat. Well, what happens if I want to create one called dog? It's in another JavaScript file. And I have another JavaScript file for my whales, another one for my coyotes, another one for my lizards, and so on and so forth. In fact, I've got 100 of these JavaScript files. In each and every single one of them, I'm going to have to add this class equals animal, which is really a bad idea, because if I wanted to come in here inside, what is this, cat, for example, and just say weight equals 0, I just wanted to add this new property inside there, I'm going to have to add it to each and every single one of those files. So as you can tell, it doesn't scale very well, and you'll be prone for errors if you use it. So this is the problem that import will help solve. What I'm going to do here now is I'm going to go into a new JavaScript file, and I'm going to create it called animal, and it's going to have the exact definition of class within it. And I'm going to add at the very beginning an export default. Now, in 3 weeks, we're going to cover a lot more detail what export does, but for the purposes of this particular presentation, export basically tells JavaScript that, hey, this variable, in this case, this object, in this case, animal, is available for being exported to other JavaScript files. And that's really important. So I'm saying here, export default class animal. That basically says JavaScript, okay, I've got an object here called animal that's ready to be imported into an application or into another JavaScript file. So if I now go over to my import, I can replace all of this with just this. I'll just copy it over. Boom! Import animal from animal. And so this is our import statement. And its whole purpose is to be able to import or to bring in objects from other JavaScript files. The important parts of this is first of all, the object itself that we're importing. And in this case, we're importing a class. So I've got it, as you can tell, as a capital A-N-I-M-A-L there. Now, in this case, it matches the same as our class animal that we have here. It doesn't have to. You can rename it at this particular point in time should you wish. And we'll cover that here a little bit later on. This last part here is the file to get the JavaScript file from. Now, when you use the import statement here, JavaScript is going to expect there to be some sort of export statement on the other side most of the time. Now, there is a few little exceptions, and we're not going to get into those. You can read it on the Mozilla documentation if you wish. But in general, if you want to keep everything all nice and pretty and all nice and orderly, you want to have an export on the file you're trying to import. So in this case, as you can tell, I've got the export to default here. So I'm now importing animal from animal.js. And so once that occurs, and it's static here, it's going to occur immediately, the object called animal will be available to us as if we had said, like we did originally, that class equals animal. So now that animal is available, I can then again say my new animal is cat. So initiate my variable here, and I'm going to do the console.log. So now if we go back over to Node, and let's clear the screen off, and we type in node import. Boom, get the same thing. So that's the beauty of an import. The import allows us to import variables from other JavaScript files or objects from other JavaScript files and make them available as if it was created within our JavaScript file. And the great advantage of that is, let's take that example we had before where I had 100 or 1,000 different JavaScript files which had class with equals animal in it. Doesn't matter anymore. Now that I have import animal from animal.js in each and every one of those JavaScript files, whether it's 100, 1,000, or 10,000 JavaScript files, it doesn't matter. If I wanted to come in here and type in weight equals 0, and now if I wanted to add height equals 0 inside the default class equals animal, height equals 0 is now available to all 1,000 of those JavaScript files. So that is the most important thing that import allows us to do, is it allows us to modularize our JavaScript objects within different JavaScript files and then bring them in if we happen to need them. Now, do you always have to bring in just one object at a time? No, you can bring in multiple ones. And we're going to show you that next. Now let me show you some other ways that the import statement can be used to bring in objects from other JavaScript files. Before we do that, let's take a look at how we've changed our export a little bit on our export file. Now I have 3 different functions that have been defined inside my zoo.js, the entrance, an egress, and a type. And I'm using the export command to export all 3 of these. And what that will do is that will now make JavaScript say that these particular functions, entrance, egress, and type, are available for export or importing into a JavaScript file in another application. So let's take a look at the myzoo.js and show different ways how now we can import that information. And the first way is we import them all at one time. But now notice, instead of just having, as we did before, import animal from whatever, now I'm doing 3 different variables within curly Q brackets. And that basically says here is JavaScript, I am expecting there to be 3 objects, entrance, egress, and type inside zoo.js. And so JavaScript is going to come back and say, yep, yeah, there certainly is. There's entrance, egress, and type. Here they are. MyZoo is going to come back and say, up, thank you very much. And so once it now gets to line number 2 here, it's going to basically say, I now have a function called entrance, a function called egress, and a function called type. And they are executed exactly like you would have any other functions, as if they were defined here inside of the JavaScript file. So there's my entrance, here's my egress, and here is my type. So what I should expect then is I should expect that first is console.log, welcome to the zoo, because I'm calling egress entrance first. Then I'm doing the types on cat, dog, and whale, and I should have it to return feline, canine, then really big animal. And then finally, I should do an egress, which will do this way to the egress, console.log. We'll see how it works. Of course you do. Let's flip over to Node, and let's type in Node my zoo. Welcome to the zoo. I have a feline, I have a canine, I have a really big animal, this way to the egress. So hey, worked out exactly like a champ. Now earlier I had told you that you could rename all these different different objects that come back in there. How do you do that? Let's take a look at some file I've got stored down here at the bottom, and let's bring it here. And notice there's only one particular change. Let's assume that within this JavaScript file here, I had a variable called type already defined. If I have a variable already defined called type, I certainly can't re-import another variable called type from the zoo.js. So I'm going to use the type as animal type within the import statement. And that tells JavaScript to say, hey, expect type to come in from the exported JavaScript file, but then rename it to animal type, so that when I get to line 2 here, I'll have still have my 3 functions, one called entrance, one called egress, but my 3rd function is no longer called type, it is called animal type. So I'll do the entrance, then I'll do animal type to get the types for the cat, the dog, and the whale, and then I will do the egress. So let's flip back over to Node, and let's clear off the screen, run it again, and yep, work like a champ. There's the zoo. I have a feline, canine, a really big animal, and this way to the egress. So that's how you can use the import statement to be able to import different functions. Now, do you have to import all 3 of them? No, no, no. I could have just imported entrance or egress or just type or whatever. Doesn't really matter. So not only can you import just certain functions or certain objects, you can import multiple ones at one time. You can even rename them if you wish. Now, the next thing we're going to show you is we're going to take the import statement and make it dynamic. Aha! That's next. So everything we've done so far has been import something from something, and that's called a static import. So JavaScript will read in all the data from the JavaScript file, and then once it finishes up, it will continue execution. But you can also do everything dynamically. And in that particular case, we use an import statement as a function, and that function will return a promise and not the actual data. Now, we're not going to go through promises. We've done boring JavaScript videos before on promises. You can check all that up. But needless to say is that once the promise gets resolved, you will then have your object that you can then manipulate and do whatever you need to do. So let's take a look, a very quick example of how that is done. I have my default class animal here. And within that default class animal, it's the same thing we've been looking at this entire thing here. I also now have a cat class, which extends the animal class. And all it does is just set the type to class. And I am doing a console.log imported class here to show you that it does import what we expected to import. I also got one called dog, which does this type equals dog. It extends the animal, and it says import dog. And I got a whale one, which extends the animal, sets this type to whale, and it does the import whale. So now let's get over to the dynamic code. Now, since it's a promise-based one, I'm doing an immediately executing function, and I'm doing an async function here. Again, I've also done async functions in boring JavaScript. You can check out those videos later. Here is the code that we use. Notice now import is not import something from something. It basically looks like a function now. And what I'm passing to import is I am passing a file name to import. And I'm also doing, since it's doing a promise here, I'm doing an await function here, so it will basically wait until the promise is resolved or rejected before returning back the information. And once it returns back the information, it doesn't actually return the physical object itself, just like all the other imports. It returns an object, a meta object, for instance, that will contain all the different objects that you may need to extract from that. And what I'm extracting from here is the default object, which I'm calling zoo_animal, which basically I'm renaming it. So although I am downloading cat, I would probably say default cat, for there, since I'm doing cat there. Since I kind of want this to be generic, I'm renaming it to zoo_animal. So even though if I do whale here, which exports the whale class, or dog, which exports the dog class, or cat, which exports the cat class, I am going to rename it to zoo_animal, because all those happen to be the default. So once everything completes here, once the promise has been resolved, by the time it gets to line 5 here, it is going to have an object called zoo_animal that will represent whatever animal I loaded in, cat, dog, or whale. Now in this example, I've got it hard-coded for cat. So what I should expect to happen when I do my superstring here is I first should be able to see this console.log imported cat. And that's the reason we have the console.logs here inside the constructor for each of these, so I can show you that it only imported cat. So I got the cat one here, I got the dog one here, and I got the whale one here. So we should expect, when we initialize this, to first get the message saying imported cat. Then it should be able to do the to superstring here, which is what we saw earlier before. You want to see how it works? Let's get to it. Let's go over to Node, and let's type in Node dynamic. See if I got to be able to spell right. Dynamic. And notice it just said imported cat. So we did a dynamic import there, and we passed cat to it. This proves that it just imported cat. It didn't touch dog. It didn't touch a whale. It just touched cat. And so we got the information that we are expecting here, that its type was cat, which means it did initiate a cat, because that's how the to superstring works, and the age is 9 years old. So that shows you how you're able to use an import to dynamically import different JavaScript files based upon certain conditions. And this is extremely good if you have things like this where you want to be able just to import certain classes based upon certain conditions, in this case with the cat here, or if you just want to be able to read, let's say, a database outside of a database somewhere, and from that database you can figure out what classes to extract. So this is how you do the dynamic import. And that's all there is to using the import statement. I hope you enjoyed our video. Hope I didn't bore you to death. Please view all of our videos at www.boringjavascript.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, or check out everything we have at www.thevirtuoid.com. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you later.